On this episode of Newt's World, what if the Roman Empire never truly fell? In the Neverending Empire, Aldo Cazzullo argues that Rome's influence is the foundation of the modern West and the United States. From the language of American democracy, republic, Senate, liberty, citizen, to the architecture of its most powerful institutions, the echoes of Rome are everywhere. Here to discuss his new book, I am really pleased to welcome my guest, Aldo Cazzullo. He has been reporting on major Italian and international events for 35 years, published 30 books on Italian history, and selling 1.5 million copies. He is currently deputy editor of the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera. And I have to say, as somebody who had the fortune to live in Rome for 3.5 years, having a chance to talk about Rome, a city which is truly eternal, and to talk about the Republic and the Empire, which is one of the great historic periods in human history, to me is very exciting. Aldo, I really welcome you, and I thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Thank you so much.
Now, you say in your book, The Neverending Empire, The Infinite Impact of Ancient Rome, quote, "The Roman Empire never really fell, nor will it ever fall. It has continued to live on in the minds, words, and symbols of the empires that came after it." What do you mean by that?
Every empire in history presented and portrayed itself as the real heir of the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, the Holy Roman Empire, Charlemagne. Tsar and Kaiser are words that derive from Caesar, the Russian Empire, the German Empire. Napoleon adored Caesar. He wrote a book about him, and he wanted to be crowned not a king, rather than emperor of the French. We had the British Empire, but in my opinion, the real heir of the Roman Empire is the American Empire. What was the symbol of the Roman legions? The eagle. What the symbol of the USA? The eagle. What's the USA's motto? E pluribus unum, out of many states, one. It's a Latin motto. I think that English is the new Latin, the language of the world. Everything in DC reminds me of Rome. The Senate, Capitol Hill is named after the Capitolium, one of the 7 legendary hills upon which Rome was born. Jefferson Memorial is a copy of the Pantheon. The dome of Capitol Hill is a copy of St. Peter Dome. But above all, the strategy of the American Empire is the same of the Roman Empire, turning the defeated enemies into allies, just like America did with Italy, Germany, and Japan after World War II. Forging different pacts, different alliances, different agreements with different peoples, and valuing the cultural, military, and political influence more important than occupation of territories. Real power is power on minds and on souls. And it's not true that America is declining. In my opinion, if there is something new in the world, a book, a film, a song, a medicine, a vaccine, a scientific discovery, technological innovation, a cultural fad, it comes from the USA. The rest of the world, China included, or copies or buys.
From your standpoint, let's go back to Rome itself. Why did it emerge, and why was it such a remarkable center of achievement for the ancient world?
I think that, for example, women in Rome had greater rights and freedom than in any other ancient civilizations. In Rome, women dined with the men, could frequent therms and arenas, and women could own, sell, and buy things. A right that in Europe was granted to the women just a century ago. Democracy is a Greek word, but the first real democracy was the Roman Republic. It was the people, not the Senate, who elected the consuls. It was the people, not the Senate, who declared war, who made laws. And in fact, the founders' fathers of the USA looked to the Roman Republic. You know that Hamilton signed his articles with the name Publius. Publius was one of the first consuls. In 1777, George Washington rejected the peace offers of the British generals, saying, "The United Armies of America are fighting for the noblest of causes, freedom." The same principles inspired the arms of the ancient Rome at the days of its glory. It's amazing how the founders fathers of America looked to the Roman Republic. But John Booth, Lincoln's killer, chose the code name Ides of March, like Brutus. He was convicted to kill a tyrant. He was wrong. Lincoln was not a tyrant. Lincoln was a great president. But he thought that the USA was becoming an empire. I remember when Kennedy, in June 1963, spoke in Berlin, he told, 2 millennia ago, the greatest pride was to be able to say, Civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen. And now, in the free world, Kennedy said, the greatest pride is to say, Ich bin ein Berliner. I am a citizen of Berlin. The key phrase of the Cold War is carved out a motto of the ancient Rome. It's incredible. Rome is alive. Roman civilization is alive. And you were saying, all the words of politics, all the language of the power, they derive from Latin. Citizen, people, emperor, dictator, priest, prince, president, liberty, dignity, infamy, honor, justice, treaty, society, veto, suffrage, propaganda. Socialism, communism, fascism, nationalism, liberalism are Latin words. And the most important is republic, res publica, public thing. The idea that the state belongs to everyone was born in Rome.
But I agree largely with your position that somehow in the period of the Republic before it decayed and collapsed, they had found a system of liberty and a system of self-government, which then gave them a resilience so that even when they went to war, even if they were defeated temporarily, they just kept coming because they could draw on the totality of the Roman people in a way that nobody else could. So you have Hannibal, for example, spends 17 years going up and down Italy, can't break into the walls of the city, and ultimately is defeated because the Romans can keep generating more resources and more people. I want to push you just a little bit here. When you look all the way back to that period, and you look to the very tiny city, which gradually keeps growing and growing and growing, what do you think was the ingredient in their culture which gave them this capacity to have enormous resilience and an extraordinary capacity for mobilizing the entire society in a way that nobody else could compete with?
You are right. Rome could lose a battle, and Rome lost many battles, but in the end, Rome always won the wars. Why? Because the Romans were not only able to make war, they were able also to think of war, to understand war. Roman legionary was not a hero, was not a warrior, he was a soldier. He was a citizen. He fought for something more than himself or his clan or his tribe or his family. He fought for Rome, for the Republic, res publica, public thing. And his goal was not a glorious death. His goal was a peaceful retirement thanks to the lands and the gold taken away by the enemy. And the Roman general was not a heroic figure. Win or die. No, he was an engineer. He was a strategist. He was a planner. He knew that Rome could lose a battle, but in the end, Rome will win the war. I think the Romans had to face the same issues we have now to face: the permanent state of war and immigration. How did the Romans face immigration? By integration. One could become Roman, whatever one's origin, skin color, or religion. And it's true also for America. One could become American. This is the greatness of America. It's not important where your ancestors come from, what the color of your skin, which religion you believe in, what foods you eat, what your sexual orientation. What matters is what you are worth, what you know, what you do is important, what you bring to the community. This is the secret of the force of the ancient Rome. This is the secret of the force of the United States of America.
It's fascinating both the way the Republic emerged and grew from the legend of Romulus and Remus to the replacement of the king, which I think is 476 BC, and then you get about 4 centuries of a pretty stable system, which then begins to decay. And part of it, I think, is that as Rome began to conquer the whole Mediterranean, it began to appear to foreign governments that it was cheaper to bribe the Romans than to fight them. And so you had this enormous explosion of corruption. I was very struck years ago by Colleen McCullough's 7-volume novel about Caesar, which begins with his uncle, the first man in Rome, Marius. And you have kings showing up and princes showing up with huge amounts of cash and just gradually corrupting the system. And in a sense, as it's falling apart, you then have this amazing resurgence. I've often wondered if Caesar had failed and you'd had Pompey win and the old order continued, what would have happened? But when Caesar first emerges, then gets killed, then his nephew Augustus, or Octavius, who becomes Augustus, takes over. Augustus somehow stabilizes the system, creates a framework that is able to function, that lasts for another 400 years. You've said that you regard Gaius Julius Caesar as one of the greatest men to have ever lived. I happen to agree with you, but I'm curious to get your take. What is it you see in Caesar that you think made him so extraordinary?
If he had just a writer or just a political leader or just a military commander, Julius Caesar would have gone down in history. But he was all of the 3 things. He was a great writer. Gallia omnis divisa est in partes tres. The whole goal is divided into 3 parts. The beginning of the Bello Gallicus, extraordinary. He was a great political leader. He was also a great military commander. And he was also a journalist. He invented the tweet. When he defeated the king of Pontus in 4 hours, he wrote to the Senate, Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. 3 words, 12 letters, the first tweet in history. When he was 32, he got his first political charge, procurator in Spain. He traveled all the Spain. He went to Cadiz in Gibraltar, where Hercules erected the columns to say this is the end of the world. And there was a great statue of Alexander the Great. And Caesar had an emotional breakdown, bursting into tears. And his companion asked him, "Why are you crying, Caesar?" And he answered, "At my age, Alexander was the master of the world. I haven't done anything glorious yet." And the companion said, "You are crazy, Caesar. Rome is not an empire. Rome is not a kingdom. Rome is a republic. And we, the populares, we are losing." Caesar was the leader of the opposition, of the populares. We can say the left. He supported the frumentatio, free distribution of wealth. But at the power was in the hands of his enemies, the aristocrats, Optimates, Pompey, Sylla, Cato, Cicero. And Caesar wanted to become the master of the world. And he was becoming the master of the world. Before being assassinated, he planned to conquer Persia and Germany. And the defense of the Republic killed them to save the Republic. But they failed. They failed because at the funeral of Caesar, Antony read his will, his testament. And Caesar left 300 sesterces, thousands of dollars, to the people, to each Roman citizen. And I think at every funeral, everyone mourns their own death. But that time, even so more, because for the people, Caesar appeared like a father. So the people revolted against Brutus, against Cassius, against the conspirators who had killed Caesar. They had to flee, and Brutus had a vision, a giant shadow saying, I am your evil genius. I will see you in Philippi. The day after the last battle, Brutus asked, where are we now? What's the name of this place? We are in Philippi. And he understood that his destiny would be terrible.
Every time I listen to somebody giving Mark Antony's oration, the Shakespeare version, it is so stunning. Antony took them from hating Caesar to loving Caesar in one speech, which is quite remarkable. But in some ways, although their roles are very different, I think that Augustus is as fascinating as his uncle. How do you measure, how do you think about Augustus as compared to Julius?
I think that Julius Caesar was a genius. Augustus was not a genius. He was a wise and cruel man. But he died in his own bed. Unfortunately, we cannot say the same about Caesar. Augustus was a great politician. He invented propaganda. Augustus was the first man in history whose face was known by all of his contemporaries. There were 2,500 statues with the face of Augustus, one in each city of the empire. In fact, Priscilla Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg's wife, wrote, we spent our honeymoon in Rome, but I thought we were free because Mark wanted to be photographed with all the statues of Augustus he met. There were many, many, many statues of Augustus. It's very interesting. Mark Zuckerberg has his hair cut like Augustus. He ended his meetings with the cry Dominium in Latin. He called his daughters August, Maxima, and Aurelia, Latin names. You know that Elon Musk proclaimed himself Emperor of Mars. Also, Bill Gates is a fan of the ancient Rome. The digital emperors look to the ancient Rome, to the Roman emperors, who were the first to rule immense communities composed of people who would never meet physically, but who were born, lived, and died under one Caesar. And the first Caesar was not Julius Caesar, was Augustus. Also, if there is also a rumor that the wife of Augustus, Livia, poisoned him by the figs. He liked the figs. And Livia wanted his son, Tiberius, was the heir. We don't know. I hope that Augustus died of a natural death. Surely he changed everything. He changed also the calendar. He created a new era. He had great poets at his court, just like Virgil. You know, Virgil had to choose a father for the Romans, a founder. And some claimed we, the Romans, we are the descendants of Achilles, the strongest. Some claimed we are the descendants of Ulysses, the smartest. Virgil said no. We are the descendants of Aeneas, the pious, the merciful. Pietas doesn't mean only mercy, it means responsibility, moral strength. Aeneas is not a winner, is not a conqueror, he's a defeated hero. He has to flee from Troy, but he flees with holding his son, Iulus in Latin, the ancestor of Julius Caesar, by the hands, and carrying on the shoulders Anchises, his father. So Aeneas is the pious hero who cares for the elders and for the descendants, who take charge of the past and of the future, who looks ahead and behind. And pietas is the Roman feeling in which the Christians recognize themselves. This is the reason why Dante chose Virgil as a guide for his trip into paradise and hell and purgatory. And you know that Virgil wrote that a poor will be born to save the mankind. And the Christians thought that Virgil had predicted the birth of Jesus Christ.
You wrote that if today we are Christians, it is because Rome became Christian. From your perspective, how central is Rome's conversion to Christianity?
Very, very important. Also, the gods could become Romans. But every god had his homeland. Isis from Egypt, Mithra from Persia, Yahweh from Judea. The Christian God was universal. At the beginning, their emperors persecuted the Christians because they didn't understand the Christians. The Christians refused to adore the emperor, refused to recognize the other gods. And Christianity appeared to the Romans to have turned their world upside down. Poverty, that for the Romans was a disgrace, became a virtue for the Christians. The body, instead of being massaged, perfumed, made up, exhibited, delighted with any pleasures, food, sex, wine terms, became something negative. The important is not the matter. The important is the soul and the spirit for the Christians. And the cross, that was the symbol of the most atrocious, painful, humiliating public death, became the symbol of salvation. But an emperor, Constantine, understood that strange religion that no one could erase, he could embrace. It's true that Christianity promises a revolution. The last one will be the first ones, but not in this life, in afterlife. One emperor on earth and one God on heaven. It was a great idea.
I just realized that without the orderliness of the Mediterranean, it might have been dramatically harder for Christianity to explode the way it did. You mentioned Constantine. Can you sort of describe the story of Constantine's dream on the night of October 27th, AD 312? And in your judgment, is this mythical or do you think it really happened?
According to the tradition, Constantine dreamt an angel with a cross, and the angel told him, "Inoc signo vinces." With this sign you will win. And the day after, he put the cross on the shields of his army, and Constantine's army defeated the army of his enemy, Massenfio, and Rome became Christian. We won't ever know if the tradition is true or not. Surely it's a mystery. The conversion of Constantine is a mystery. His mother, Helena, was Christian, and according to the tradition, he discovered the real cross, the Jesus cross in Jerusalem. He found 3 crosses. He touched the body of a dead man with each cross. The dead man resurrected, and this was the real cross, that the custody of the cross is in Rome, in a great Roman basilica. It's a tradition, we don't know. Surely it's a mystery, because before the emperors persecuted the Christians and Constantine became Christian. But if you go to Rome, to the Constantine Arch, there are no Christian symbols. There are no crosses. There are also the ancient pagan symbols. It's a mystery. Also, understanding if Christianity made the empire weaker or not. We won't ever know this.
You know, it's also intriguing because while the Western Empire falls around, I think, 470, if I remember correctly, the Byzantine Empire, which thought of itself as Roman, called themselves Romans. Byzantine is actually a late historian word and is not what they would have called themselves. they last another 1,000 years.
Exactly. Byzantine is a word that we, the Westerners, invented during the Renaissance to say they are Byzantines, we are the Westerners, we are the heirs of the Romans. But they called themselves Romei, that means Romans. And we think Constantinople just like a decadating word that did nothing than decay for 1,000 years. It's not true. Constantinople was a miracle, was a prodigy. They resisted the barbarians. They resisted the Arabs. They resisted the Turks until 1453. And the nephew of the last emperor, Zoe, married the first Tsar, Ivan the Great. And the Russians spoke about the third Rome. The first Rome is Rome. The second Rome is Constantinople. The third Rome is Moscow. As you know better than me, in 1845, an American journalist, O'Sullivan, first called Manifest Destiny to rule the world. Virgil wrote, we have the manifest destiny, we the Romans have the manifest destiny to rule the world. O'Sullivan wrote, we the Americans have the manifest destiny to rule the world. But also the Russians think to have a manifest destiny to protect Christianity. I think that Putin, I am against Putin, I am pro-Ukraine, but I think that Putin is doing the war in Ukraine also in his mind to save a certain idea of Christianity, of civilization, our Greek Orthodox Christian civilization. Also the Turkish emperor, Mehmet II, thought to be the new Roman emperor, the founder of a new dynasty. This is the reason why Roman history doesn't end. And I moved when I think to a great speech delivered by an American president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was 5 June 1944, the day before the American troops entered Rome, the day after they landed in Normandy. It was the turning point of the Second World War. Roosevelt said to Italo-Americans, to the Americans and to Italians, Italian people is not our enemy. Italy is Dante, Italy is Michelangelo, Italy is Galileo, Italy is Marconi, Italy is Christopher Columbus. And Rome is not only a military target. Rome was the Republic. Rome was the Empire. Rome is the Catholic Church. When I listened to that Roosevelt's speech, I moved.
That's remarkable. Well, let me ask you one last thing, which is, what advice would you give Americans? What's the lesson they should draw that applies to the time we are now in?
Do you remember Gladiator, the movie? Everybody remembers how the Gladiator begins. At my signal, unleash hell. Few remember how Gladiator ends. Before dying, the Gladiator said, there was once a dream that was Rome. It shall be realized. What was the Rome's dream? The government of the world, the universal peace, a community as large as the known world at peace, not because it was weak and divided, but because it was united and strong. A multicultural, multi-ethnic world. I think that the Roman dream is alive. We need a government of the world. We live a world unified by the values of democracy and liberty. And the only country now that can fulfill the Rome's dream is the United States of America.
I want to thank you for joining me. Your new book, The Neverending Empire, The Infinite Impact of Ancient Rome, is available now on Amazon and in bookstores everywhere. You're remarkably studied. You have an enormous sense of history. I'm really, really glad that you came and you joined us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I'm so proud. America is the new Rome. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you to my guest, Aldo Cazzullo. You can get a link to buy his new book, The Neverending Empire, The Infinite Impact of Ancient Rome, on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at Gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.